The Capitol Press Corps is an ever-changing cadre of reporters who exhaust themselves during the legislative session to bring you what you need to know about the government. It's also an ever-shrinking group, which makes their jobs more important than ever. Often reporters notice trends and themes they don't necessarily get the chance to write about or to broadcast. So we gathered four of them in our studio this week to go over the session's impact and what it portends for the rest of the year. NMIF producer Matt Grubbs has that discussion.
This is a very tired group, but hopefully everyone has had at least one day off since the end of the session. We are joined by Hannah Colton, a reporter with KUNM who focuses on public health and education. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, yeah.
Andrew Oxford writes for the Santa Fe New Mexican and has been posted up at the Capitol for months now.
Feels like years, but...
Yeah, right, exactly. From the Albuquerque Journal, Dan McKay. Dan, thanks for coming in. And from New Mexico In-Depth, Deputy Director Marjorie Childress, thanks again. Marjorie, I wanted to start with you. So for the viewers at home, we kind of talked about everything we would talk about, what we wanted to get to. And one of the things that you brought up was this was really our first chance to see how Michelle Lujan Grisham interacts with the legislature. What did you see?
Well, I mean, she kicked off the session saying she was going to be collegial, and that's what she did. I mean, she largely was collegial with lawmakers. I feel like she, was still wielding kind of her stick in the background. I mean, I don't think anyone should expect that she wasn't going to do that. She does have that veto pen she can hold over people. But in general, she was calling people up to her office. She was working with them. And I think, at the end when you saw the big, kind of panorama in her big, office on the fourth floor with all the Democrats. I mean, that basically showed you they really did strike a collegial tone. How long that will last is anyone's guess. But even with Republicans, I mean, Stuart Ingalls said at the end of the session that they're great friends. I mean, she goes way back with some of the old heads up there. Because she's been serving in state government or in the U.S. Congress for decades now, so she knows a lot of them. They work together, and I think you saw it. She had some juice. She was able to get a debate before the Senate Finance Committee at the very end on tapping the Land Grant Permanent Fund, which was the first time they had ever discussed that, I believe, publicly. She also, they passed a tax bill, which I think is a pretty big deal. I mean, it's like a $70 million package. It got pared way down from what the original proposal was from the House. And Stuart Ingalls, he's the Republican minority leader. He took credit for that. He said what we did was we had a smaller tax package. But in the previous years there would have been no tax package. And I think that a lot of that has to do with her collegiality, her first year, her ability to work with lawmakers. I think that has a lot to do with it.
Sure. She still has that veto pen, so we're not quite sure what she'll do yet.
We don't know
she
what
has the final say.
Yeah, we're in that 20-day period, so the session is not over, actually.
That's right.
It seems pretty clear that she's comfortable with this environment. She's a former cabinet secretary. She testified twice, at least twice before committees, which is unusual for a governor, although not unique. But it seems like it's something that she's pretty comfortable being engaged with lawmakers.
The likely target of some of those vetoes perhaps would be the Senate Democrats who opposed her on a number of key issues. That's something you brought up. Who are those people and what was their opposition to her agenda?
Well, we definitely saw a theme throughout the session where there was a divide between the House and the Senate, which isn't unusual, but it was maybe exacerbated this session because the House is coming off an election where the Democratic caucus moved to the left a little bit with more liberal people beating more conservative or moderate Democrats, and Democrats expanding their majority overall. That didn't happen on the Senate side, and there were a lot of moderate to conservative Senate Democrats who are older, from rural areas, and they were not, marijuana legalization was not one of their priorities, and so we saw a lot of bills cross over and then sort of meet their end in the Senate. like and bills that did make it through underwent dramatic changes, like the minimum wage proposal, the tax package,
right.
And then some were just flat out rejected, like the repeal of an anti-abortion law, and the tapping into the land grant permanent fund for early childhood education. I don't know to what extent this will show up in vetoes. It may be more that she may target these Senate Democrats to try to win them over to her side in future sessions. Michelle Lujan Grisham made a point of saying that she was trying to build relationships with John Arthur Smith. He's the chairman of the influential Senate Finance Committee, and also Clemente Sanchez. He's a Democrat from Grants. He also was a chairman of a powerful committee. So I wouldn't be surprised if she's trying to work on her relationship with them and maybe win them over to her side.
Kind of playing the long game a little bit, Andrew?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that really is going to be the big question. I mean, I was struck a little bit by how much members of her own party in the Senate were willing to go up against her on issues like the permanent fund, like abortion, like the minimum wage. I think the thing to watch too, though, will be whether the left wing of the Democratic Party really moves out to take on some of these senators. I think there's already an expectation that some of them will face primary challenges. And I don't think that that's to be taken lightly. I mean, last year, for example, we saw some very real challenges to moderate and conservative Democrats in the State House of Representatives that ended up seating them, and we saw more progressive, more left-wing Democrats take their place. So I think we could see, in some ways, a repeat of that when the Senate is up for re-election in 2020.
Okay. Hannah, did you see, as you sort of focused in on education, we have this court decision, Yazzie Martinez, that sort of points the state in the direction of spending more money, especially for disadvantaged or underserved students. Between Republicans and Democrats, was there any sort of sense of a shared mission, or did this feel to you more like something that was just foisted upon them?
I don't know that there was a huge sense of a shared mission. I mean, I think there's certainly a shared obligation that a lot of people would talk about. But I think just coming from the plaintiffs, there are multiple coalitions of sort of stakeholders that got together and made platforms and made priorities after the ruling. And so you had all of those asks coming from the community. And I think as far as in the legislature, there was not a whole lot of shared vision that, like, we want to give these coalitions what they're asking for. And there was certainly some skepticism from the more conservative lawmakers over, do we really need to be following this ruling? Is it really, should it be considered binding? I mean, John Arthur Smith, who we mentioned, chair of the Senate Finance Committee, made a comment to me in an interview early on in the session about essentially implying that the ruling could still be appealed and could still go to the state Supreme Court. That appeal did not materialize. But I think it's just to say that not everyone was totally on board.
So the state is past its deadline for that appeal, right?
I believe so.
Okay. And that's something that Michelle Lujan Grisham said on the campaign trail, that she didn't plan to appeal. But then she comes out after the session and says she plans to mount a vigorous defense when they go before a Santa Fe District Court judge in April. What does that look like, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not lost on her that she entered office inheriting already a number of long-running court cases over things like the state's prison system, the state's food stamp system, services for people with developmental disabilities. And I think she's concerned that this could become one more area where there's long-running court oversight. And I think that she's being pretty blunt at this point, that she's going to push back against having the judiciary looking over the shoulder of her administration, for and future administrations for years to come, and having to go back to them constantly in some of these matters. So I think that she's going to be pushing back a little bit more in court to make sure that this doesn't just drag on and on, kind of getting to what Hannah said about there being some debate about what does this lawsuit mean for the long-term management of this system.
Well, and I'll add that Yazzie Martinez consolidated lawsuit is not the first education lawsuit that New Mexico has been subject to, right? So Zuni has been on the books for years and years.
And that's the lawsuit that sort of brought into being the state equalization guarantee, where we said that we're going to try to rich districts aren't going to have as much, and poor districts are going to have a little bit more, basically.
Right, and that obviously brought New Mexico's education system into a more equitable place or a more equitable direction. But this is just the latest lawsuit to say, hey, we're not doing well enough. We're not equitable enough. Yeah.
Sure. We seem to be really good in New Mexico at getting into these situations where the court has to sort of ride herd on everything, whether it's healthcare conditions in prisons, something like that, Albuquerque police. It's kind of an odd position, I think, for us to be in. Dan, did you get a sense of whether the legislature wants out of this? Whether they would like to. We keep hearing the phrase "education moonshot" so many times. But is that something that that you got the sense that the legislature wanted to work its way out of quickly? Do they see this as a longer path?
I think pretty clearly they look at this as something that is going to take multiple sessions to pump more money into education and make some changes, other changes to the system. In some cases, the ruling might have been sort of politically advantageous for people who wanted to put more money into the education system even before there was a lawsuit. And now we may see the tension that Andrew and Hannah have mentioned about whether, well, do we really want to be under the judges, the court's oversight on these kinds of things? Legislators, all government agencies really, sort of hold fast to their power and their authority. And so I think they do not want to see that erode to a judge. I think clearly this will be something that it will probably be a dominant issue in future sessions, depending on what the judge says, but also among legislators and school districts as they try and figure out how to expand the programs they have that work. There's broad consensus that pre-K and the K-5 Plus program that adds weeks to the school year in some elementary schools, that those programs show pretty good results, but there's been intense debate over how to fund them.
Right. Marjorie, it takes lawmakers a long time to do things sometimes. Excuse me. When we look at transparency, the Ethics Commission, what were your takeaways from the session? Lawmakers know that they have to get an ethics commission formed either this session or next session, basically, is the idea.
Well, there was a lot of folks were wondering if they were going to kick it to next year. And because they were not able, they didn't even introduce a bill till about halfway through the session. And there were competing bills. And I think lawmakers at a certain point towards the end of the session, some of the other lawmakers who haven't really been at the center of drafting ethics commission legislation or debating that in the Senate Rules Committee, which is where a lot of it has played out over the years, said, wait, this is going to look really bad for us if we don't get this passed. And so they did it quickly. And it was kind of a compromise bill. It does retain some of the transparency measures that transparency advocates really were pressing for. So, I expect that commission to be a point of, there will be continued struggles over the years to gain greater transparency out of, what happens in that commission. But I would, it's 13 years in the making to get an ethics commission. There's been a cascade of state scandals, so it took a long time to actually get lawmakers to even agree to put it to the voters in the first place. Another example is the Campaign Finance Reform Act that was passed. That's Peter Wirth's bill. He started advocating for that bill about a decade ago. It takes a long time to pass a bill up there, particularly when it comes to disclosure. And this bill actually enshrines in statute rules that the Secretary of State put in about a couple of years ago, that require independent groups who don't rise to the bar to have to register as a political action committee. They actually have to report to the Secretary of State their expenditures in elections. And it's a huge win for transparency to know who's playing in our elections, because last year's election, there was like one organization that spent like $500,000 on mailers targeting, we all got them probably, And they never would have had to have reported that before those rules were put into place. So that's a huge win. But those bills, I mean, disclosure bills, they do take a long time. And so other bills, I think the big one for us that we're watching is the bill to require greater transparency around how lawmakers and the governor divvy up their capital outlay money. This is infrastructure money, money that gets spread around the state to fund infrastructure projects.
Senior centers, school buses, ambulances,
Roads,
all those things. Okay.
hospitals. I mean, it's really important money to the state. But our system here is the only one, I think, in the country that allows a big pot of that money to be just split up by lawmakers who get to just dole it out.
So we see what the projects are for, but we don't see who requested what.
We don't see who actually allocated the money. It's kept secret unless the lawmakers individually give permission.
And this isn't a few $100,000.
This year was about $1 billion. and
It's none of your business, Marjorie.
It's none of my business, I guess. I mean, you can see the projects, but who actually gave the money? But that bill, there has been a movement among lawmakers actually for about 4 years now to push a bill forward to make all that public, who allocated the money.
Mm-hmm.
And that got to the Senate floor. It almost neared the finish line, which I was kind of surprised actually, because if you think about it, there's a lot of opposition to it. There has been in the past, but 4 years is actually kind of a quick educational process.
That's another example of the tension between the House and the Senate.
Okay.
Some of the transparency measures around capital outlay have passed the House and then sort of run aground in the Senate.
And Dan, this is long-running tension you're talking about, not just this session? Okay.
Yeah, so we'll see. But as Marjorie said, sometimes it takes lawmakers a while to get comfortable with an idea. They debate it over and over and over again, and sometimes they succeed. The repealing the death penalty took an incredibly long time, but we'll see. It did make it. It got a lot of discussion, and perhaps it'll have better luck in a future session.
This is something that's just sort of been rattling around in my head. When it comes to things like the Ethics Commission, where the legislature says to voters, hey, should we create this thing? Should we do this, make this change to the PRC or something like that? They come to voters with a very general and good sounding idea. And they say, should we do this? And voters say, by 75% in the Ethics Commission case, yeah, we should do this. And then it gets into the actual nitty gritty of it, and it's just ugly. Are lawmakers punting here, or?
Well, that debate that we saw play out over how to construct it has
Right.
been playing out for a decade.
Okay.
That was along the same contours of the debate that's been playing out for decades around subpoena power, politicizing. People are worried it's going to become political, But voters have been on board with it from polling. Polling has shown voters have been on board with it for many, many, many years. And so the 75% approval was no surprise.
Right. Well, we've had far more lawmakers and policymakers going to jail than we've had false reports. I mean,
It was particularly ironic in this case, though, because there were lawmakers who knew this was going to pass, who could see this was going to pass, convened a subcommittee meeting openly for months and months and months leading up to the session, talking with transparency groups, chambers of commerce, interested citizens, anybody who wanted to come to these meetings, and actually worked on kind of a draft bill, really. And when they got to the session, it was still weeks before anyone introduced anything. And there was still this huge debate, and it still came down to the wire.
But you know why it came down to the wire, and this gets into the arcane process of the legislature. Bills get derailed in one committee room. They can get derailed by 2 or 3 lawmakers in a committee room. And then it's just dead if it doesn't go past that, unless there's some political juice to pull it out of there by other people.
Well, and in this case, you're still talking about asking politicians to give up some power. Right. And that was, I think, the main sticking point, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
To your point about constitutional amendments, that you hit on a point that the lawmakers struggle with, which is that they debate how much detail to put in these constitutional amendments. Some of them philosophically don't want a lot of detail in the Constitution. They want to reserve that
principles
power.
And things like that.
Yeah, they want to reserve the details to themselves, and others want strong protections in the Constitution, so legislators can't tamper with them. So I think you see the lawmakers themselves struggle with what ought to go in the Constitution versus what ought to be part of an enabling law.
You guys, I knew we would run out of time before we ran out of things to talk about. But thank you all for taking time to be here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.